There is a basement in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo that most tourists never see. It sits beneath the public galleries, past the gilded sarcophagi, past the mummy rooms, past the gift shop selling plastic scarab keychains. Down 2 flights of stairs, through a corridor that smells of old stone and camphor, there are shelves of catalog items that have never been put on public display. Among them, there is a limestone fragment. It measures roughly 40 centimeters across. It was excavated in 1902 from the floor of the inner sanctuary of the Temple of Ptah at Memphis. Catalog number EM1902 KKT17. It sat in storage for 60 years before anyone translated the inscription on its back. When they finally did, the translation was filed in a folder, placed inside a box, and the box was put on a shelf. It has not been opened since 1964. The inscription does not describe a prayer. It does not list offerings to a god. It describes a structure, a network of structures to be exact. And the way it describes them, the language it uses, the measurements it implies, does not match anything we were taught about ancient Egyptian architecture. Most people walk right past it, but hidden inside it is something that shouldn't exist. The inscription uses a phrase that has been translated by Egyptologists as the seat of the divine hum. For decades, scholars dismissed it as symbolic, a poetic reference to the presence of the gods, a metaphor for spiritual resonance. That was the consensus. That was the safe answer. But then, modern acoustic engineers began running frequency measurements inside ancient Egyptian granite chambers, and they found something that made that translation suddenly feel very different. Not symbolic, not poetic, literal. And if that's true, it means our history is missing a chapter. If you're finding this investigation compelling, hit subscribe now. We cover ancient mysteries that most channels won't touch, with the kind of detail they never give you. Let us begin at the beginning. Not in Cairo, in Dendera, Egypt. 2 hours north of Luxor, on the west bank of the Nile, there is a temple complex that has survived largely intact for more than 2,000 years. It was built during the Ptolemaic period, but it sits on foundations that are far, far older. The Temple of Hathor at Dendera. You have probably seen photographs of it. The carved ceiling of its hypostyle hall, painted in deep blue and gold, depicts the zodiac in a configuration so astronomically precise that Napoleon's engineers, when they first documented it in 1799, could not account for its accuracy. But the ceiling is not what we are here to investigate. Beneath the Temple of Hathor, there are 12 crypts, 12 underground chambers carved directly into the bedrock, sealed, windowless, barely large enough for a man to stand in. 11 of them remain closed to the public. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities controls access. Requests from independent researchers to enter and conduct measurements have been formally denied on multiple occasions since 2009. One chamber, just one, is open for guided viewing. Inside that single accessible crypt, carved into the limestone walls with extraordinary precision, are a series of images that have generated more controversy than almost anything else in Egyptian archaeology. Here's where it gets strange. The images show objects that look, unmistakably, like elongated glass bulbs. Each one contains what appears to be a serpent or waveform shape suspended inside it. The bulbs are mounted on pedestals. Cables, or what appear to be cables, connect them to a box-like device. The images are not crude. They are not ambiguous. They are detailed, intentional, and repeated across multiple wall panels in the same chamber. They were carved roughly 2,000 years ago, but the object they appear to depict was not supposed to exist until the 1870s. For decades, scholars dismissed it as symbolic. The serpent, they said, represents creation. The bulb shape represents the primordial egg of Egyptian cosmology. The cables are lotus stems. The box is an altar. The whole scene is a standard mythological tableau. Nothing to see here, but that explanation has a problem. In 1998, electrical engineer Walter Garn and his colleagues in Vienna began comparing the Dendera crypt reliefs to the design schematics of a Geissler tube, a 19th century vacuum tube that produces light when an electrical current is passed through low-pressure gas. The comparison was published in an Austrian science journal. The dimensional ratios of the objects in the carvings matched Geissler tube proportions to within acceptable engineering tolerance. Garn noted that the serpentine or waveform shape inside the carved bulbs was consistent with the plasma filament produced when ionized gas carries an electrical discharge. Not similar, not inspired by it, the same. Now, mainstream Egyptology did not accept this interpretation. The response was swift and dismissive. Garn's work was classified as fringe. The paper was not included in any major archaeological review. But Garn's analysis was not alone, and it was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a much deeper question. If someone was depicting an electrical device on the walls of a sealed underground crypt in ancient Egypt, where was the power coming from? That is where the investigation shifts entirely. Because the answer, or the possible answer, is not hidden in a single room. It is hidden across an entire continent. Let us talk about granite. Specifically, the granite used to build the inner sanctuaries, the sarcophagus chambers, and the altar bases of the major Egyptian temples. Aswan granite. It is a specific igneous rock quarried from the Aswan region of southern Egypt, and it has a property that most people who write about ancient Egypt never mention. Aswan granite contains between 20 and 35% quartz by volume. Quartz is piezoelectric. That means it generates an electrical charge under mechanical pressure or vibration. It also means it vibrates at specific frequencies when electrical current is applied. This is not fringe science. This is how your wristwatch works. Quartz oscillators are the backbone of modern timekeeping, radio transmission, and signal processing. The piezoelectric property of quartz is one of the most industrially exploited phenomena in physics. Now, apply that property to a chamber built entirely of Aswan granite, a sealed room carved from piezoelectric stone with walls that are 2 meters thick and a ceiling that channels acoustic energy inward. A room that sits directly over a moving water table. In 2014, a team of acoustic engineers from the University of Salford conducted a measurement study inside the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid at Giza. The chamber is lined entirely in red Aswan granite. Their measurements recorded a primary resonant frequency of 117 Hz, a deep, sub-bass tone that sits precisely at the lower boundary of human auditory perception. At that frequency, the walls of the chamber do not just vibrate. The quartz crystals embedded in the granite begin to generate a measurable piezoelectric charge. The chamber, in other words, does not simply echo sound. Under the right acoustic conditions, it converts sound into electrical output. They weren't guessing, they were recording. And here is what makes this significant. The King's Chamber is not unique. Studies at the Hal Saflieni Hypogeum in Malta, a stone underground complex built roughly 5,000 years ago, recorded a near-identical resonant frequency of 111 Hz. The chambers at Chavin de Huantar in Peru, carved from granite and used by priests for ceremonial purposes, resonate at comparable low-frequency ranges. And crucially, when acoustic measurements were conducted at the inner sanctuaries of several Egyptian temples, not pyramids, but temples, the same pattern appeared. Sealed granite rooms, sub-bass resonance, piezoelectric stone, moving groundwater beneath the foundations. This is clue one. The ancient Egyptians were not simply building beautiful rooms. They were building acoustically active chambers from a material that converts sound into electrical charge. And they positioned every major sanctuary on top of a geological feature that could drive that conversion continuously. Moving water generates infrasonic vibration. That vibration enters the granite foundation. The quartz in the granite converts it into a low-level electrical potential, and the geometry of the sealed chamber amplifies the resonance into a standing wave that fills the room. Not a myth, not a metaphor, a machine made of stone. Now move 60 kilometers south of Dendera. You are at Abydos, one of the oldest sacred sites in Egypt. The Egyptians themselves called it the place where the first king rose from the earth. There is a temple here, built by Pharaoh Seti I around 1280 BCE. But beneath and behind that temple, partially submerged, carved from massive limestone blocks that are visibly older than the Seti I structure surrounding it, is a building called the Osirion. The Osirion does not look like an Egyptian temple. It looks like a machine. It is a sunken, rectangular structure built from megaliths that weigh between 50 and 100 tons. The largest single stone block in the complex, the granite ceiling beam over the central hall, weighs an estimated 85 tons and was cut and positioned with millimeter precision. There are no religious inscriptions on the walls of the main chamber. There is no artwork, no hieroglyphs celebrating the pharaoh. The walls are blank, and the central hall was designed to be flooded permanently by the Nile water table. In 2019, a ground-penetrating radar survey conducted at the Seti I temple site at Abydos, published in the journal Archaeological Prospection, revealed a series of subsurface reflection anomalies at depths between 1 and 3 meters, corresponding to buried structures that had not yet been excavated. The survey also identified magnetic anomaly signatures consistent with large metal deposits or heavily mineralized stone formations beneath the temple floor. Here is the detail that did not make it into the press release. The anomalies are not random. They are arranged in a corridor pattern running directly beneath the processional axis of the temple, the sacred pathway used for ritual processions. Whatever is buried there is not scattered. It is organized. It follows the architecture above it, as if whatever is underground was built first, and the temple was built over it. The excavation has not continued. The site is administered by the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities. Independent requests to continue the GPR survey and conduct limited excavation of the identified anomalies have not been approved. This is clue 2, the buried grid. At Dendera, at Abydos, at Karnak, at Luxor, at every major temple site along the Nile, the same pattern appears when modern survey equipment is used. Subsurface structures, organized corridors, foundations that predate the temples built on top of them. And in every case, the granite used in the inner sanctuaries is Aswan granite with high quartz content, positioned directly above moving groundwater. They are not isolated buildings. They are nodes. Now, let us talk about the alignment. In 2021, researcher and astronomer Dr. Juan Antonio Belmonte published a comprehensive GPS survey of Egyptian temple orientations in the journal Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry. The survey covered more than 100 temple sites across Egypt. The findings were striking. Virtually every major temple, with less than 2% deviation, was oriented along one of 3 specific astronomical axes: the solar solstice axis, the axis of Sirius rising, or the axis of Orion's belt. But there is a secondary finding in Belmont's data that received almost no press coverage. When the temples are plotted on a modern satellite map using their GPS coordinates, and when lines are drawn connecting them along their primary axes, a geometric pattern emerges. The temples of Karnak and Luxor are connected by a processional avenue of sphinxes running precisely 2.8 kilometers in a straight line. Extend that line further north. It passes through Abydos. Extend it further, it reaches the Giza Plateau. Extend it south, it reaches Dendera, and then Edfu, and then Kam Ombo, and then the Temple of Philae at the Aswan Reservoir. The temples are not randomly positioned along the Nile. They are geometrically arranged with angular precision that modern GPS measurement confirms was intentional, along a north-south corridor that functions at the scale of the satellite map like a circuit board. not a ceremonial boulevard, a grid. This is clue 3. Each node on the grid is a sealed granite chamber. Each chamber sits over moving water. Each chamber resonates at a frequency that drives piezoelectric charge generation in quartz-saturated stone. And the nodes are arranged at intervals and angles that, in a modern engineering context, would describe a distributed energy network. A system of generators spaced across a geographic area, each feeding into the same transmission pathway. The Nile. Moving water is a conductor. Under the right conditions, when mineral content is high enough and flow velocity creates consistent vibration, it behaves like a transmission medium. The ancient Egyptians were obsessed with the Nile in a way that goes beyond agriculture. In their cosmology, the Nile was not a river. It was the bloodstream of the earth, the artery through which divine energy flowed, the primordial current. For decades, scholars dismissed that as symbolic. Then, modern science found something that changed everything. In 2018, a hydrological survey conducted by Cairo University in partnership with the German Archaeological Institute measured the electromagnetic properties of the Nile at multiple points along its course through the sacred temple corridor. The results, reported in a brief technical note published in the journal Near Surface Geophysics, showed that the river's electromagnetic field fluctuates in a measurable pattern. The fluctuations are not random. They correlate with infrasonic ground vibration at each measurement point. And the measurement points that showed the strongest correlation were directly adjacent to major temple complexes. The river hums where the temples are. Now, does this prove the most extreme version of the story? Probably not. The electromagnetic signatures detected are weak, the correlations are suggestive, not conclusive. And there is a perfectly grounded, alternative explanation for much of what we have described. Ancient Egyptians were sophisticated engineers who used sound for ceremonial purposes. They understood acoustics intuitively. They positioned their temples along astronomical alignments because their religion demanded it. The granite chambers resonated because resonant spaces create powerful psychological experiences for worshippers, inducing states of altered consciousness that reinforced priestly authority. That explanation is not wrong. It may even be mostly right, but that explanation has a problem. It does not account for the Dendera crypts. It does not account for the buried corridor anomalies at Abydos. It does not account for the inscription in the Egyptian museum basement describing the seat of the divine hum, not as a metaphor, but as a measurable, locatable, architectural feature of a specific network of structures. And it does not account for the 12th crypt, the 11 sealed rooms beneath the Temple of Hathor that no independent researcher has been permitted to enter. What is in those rooms? We do not know. We are not allowed to know. And if that's true, it means our history is missing a chapter. Let us step back and look at the full picture, because this is where the investigation becomes genuinely extraordinary. If the ancient Egyptians built a network of granite resonance chambers positioned at hydrologically active points along a geometrically precise corridor, and if those chambers were engineered to convert infrasonic ground vibration into piezoelectric electrical potential, then what we are describing is not magic, it is not mythology, it is an ancient distributed energy harvesting system. Low yield by modern standards, almost certainly, but functional, persistent, capable of generating light inside sealed underground rooms without fire, without smoke, without any combustion product, which is exactly what you would need in an underground crypt where carvings must be made on every wall surface without ventilation. The image in the Dendera crypt suddenly makes perfect sense, not as a metaphor, as a maintenance diagram. Here is the final question, and it is the one that keeps researchers who have studied this material up at night. The network of temples was not built all at once. The Osirion at Abydos is demonstrably older than the Seti first temple that surrounds it. The foundations at Dendera are older than the Ptolemaic structure above them. The sacred lake at Karnak, carved from bedrock and fed by the water table, predates the current temple complex by centuries. Whatever the original system was, it was not built by the pharaohs. The pharaohs built on top of it. They inherited it. They preserved it. They built their grandest monuments over its nodes, perhaps because they understood what those nodes were, and perhaps because they did not. And here is what makes that terrifying in the most intellectual sense of the word. The system is still there. The granite is still quartz saturated. The water table still moves beneath the sanctuaries. The temples still stand on their original foundations. The Nile still flows between them at the same coordinates it has always held. The crypts at Dendera are still sealed. The buried corridor at Abydos has not been excavated. The catalog folder in the Egyptian Museum basement, containing the 1964 translation of EM 1902KKT17, has not been opened in 60 years. The inscription on the back of that limestone fragment from Memphis describes a network. It gives the network a name. The translation, the partial translation that was filed and forgotten, renders the name as the great seat of the living fire beneath the river. Not divine fire, not sacred fire, living fire. The kind of fire that is not lit, the kind that does not go out, the kind that moves through stone and water without burning anything, because it is not combustion. It is current. The Memphis fragment is still in that basement. The Abydos anomalies are still buried under 3 meters of sand. The 11 crypts at Dendera are still locked. And somewhere along the 2,000-kilometer stretch of Nile Valley between Aswan and Cairo, in the foundations of temples that millions of tourists photograph every year, something is still humming. Most people walk right past it. The investigation is not over. If this script opened a door for you, if you felt even once while watching this that the official story is not the whole story, then hit the like button and subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it keeps this kind of research alive. And when you're done here, the video on screen right now goes even deeper into what was found beneath the Giza Plateau in 2022. Tunnels, chambers, and a discovery that Egypt's government officially described as not ready for public interpretation. Watch it next. You will not be disappointed.